The average tenure for major city chief now, 1 to 3 years.
Oh, wow.
I just saw an article yesterday, the commissioner for NYPD, 18 months. She's done. She's out. We see it all over the country where chiefs are doing less and less time. And a lot of it is because of the increased pressures going through the defund the police movement, dealing with COVID and all the restrictions that were going on. There's so much of a cry for change. And you know what? Some things need to change, but very little acknowledgement of the things that have changed. But it's just that one negative thing that happens,
of course,
that wipe out all of those as if they never even happened. And it's very frustrating.
We all know about the police issues. We all know about community issues. We all know how difficult it is to meld the two so that we can become one again and have safer communities that cooperate with the police departments and vice versa. But what we don't know is how someone at the top of an organization can affect that change by exemplifying their humanity. And that's what this guest does. He's truly a human and a great leader and someone who authentically cares. So welcome my brother, Chief Neil Noakes. One of the things I thought I would start with, which is kind of almost jumping into the mud, is one of the questions I sent, where we often talk about how difficult it is on police officers to do investigations when we have to fight through the anti-snitching culture, and understanding how difficult it must be to feel like you're compelled to tell on someone, but us not understanding that besides the fact that that is kind of a street rule, you also have to go back and live next door to all these people.
Yeah.
And there is a significant threat when you have to go back and live amongst the people that you just told on. That being said, we've also talked about the culture within police work, and they talk about the blue line and everything else. And not that it's as rampant as it used to be, but it is certainly something that gets brought up. What are your thoughts on how we can combat getting rid of the anti-snitch culture within law enforcement? Because obviously law enforcement's only better for it if we get rid of the bad eggs.
Yeah, that's a great question, Tegan. I've never heard anybody put it that way, but that correlation between the anti-snitch culture in some communities, some would make the same correlation with at least the history of policing. And they're both, something that's important, I think, to all of us in law enforcement. One, if I can talk about both, that anti-snitch culture that you see in some communities, there's a lot of reasons for that. I mean, everybody hears snitches get stitches. Snitches are a dying breed. Mm-hmm. And to some people, they literally mean that.
Yeah.
Somebody talks, somebody snitches, they're going to handle business. So there's a direct fear there by some of the community. And you have to be as frustrating as it is, because we want to solve cases. We have to understand the position that those members of the community are in. So we have that, but then we also have on top of that this lack of trust with the police department in general in some communities. Right. So for us to really be able to do our jobs well, we have to have those connections with the community, the people who live there, who see where the issues are and can tell us where we need to focus our resources. So trying to get past both of those is difficult, but it's not impossible. Seeing that in law enforcement is absolutely unacceptable. And you wouldn't have to go that far back to see where that ran rampant, I think, in a lot of agencies. I'm seeing the change, though. I'm seeing the shift.
Okay.
Last month, I hit 23 years with the department. And I'll say even 23 years ago, things have changed since then. We've had multiple situations recently where there are officers who were engaged in conduct that was not acceptable, whether it involved a use of excessive force, maybe just rude treatment of someone, something that does not meet the standard we expect from all forward police officers. Oftentimes we'll have citizens maybe who see it that will report it to us. Sometimes they've got their phones out. It's on camera. It's right there. But we've seen multiple instances recently where officers step up and say something about other officers. And that's not easy to do. But
especially when there's a seniority issue.
Oh, absolutely.
The
thing is, when you really look at it, though, the people who hate bad cops the most are good cops. They don't want to see someone else tarnish the badge they work so hard to earn. And I mean earn. So we're seeing more who are willing to step up because they want to protect our profession.
Yeah, the integrity of
our profession. Some people talk about we need to bring back the nobility of policing. Tegan, it never left. It's always been here. We just have to remind people sometimes, because you could have 10,000 positive impacts with the community. Just one can wipe all those away. So we have to make sure we stay on top of that as much as we can. And it's not just a culture shift that we're seeing and pushing in policing, it's in policy too. Shortly after George Floyd was murdered, there was a push across the country for certain policies to address that. Duty to intervene reports. And what that means is, if you see an officer doing something like we saw in Minneapolis, somebody do something. One person, and we all saw for 9 minutes, watched him kneel on this man's neck as he screamed and cried for his mother, said he couldn't breathe.
Right.
Just sit there. But there were other officers on scene that did nothing to stop it. The only ones that even spoke up were the most the rookie, if I can use that term, officers on the department, saying, "Hey, I'm kind of worried." And he says he can't breathe, or I'm worried about excited delirium. Maybe we should do something. But they were just pushed aside. Nobody listened. And part of it is if you have this mentality where seniority means so much, rank means so much. I don't care if it's a day one officer and it's a 20-year veteran sergeant. If that one day officer sees a 20-year veteran officer doing something wrong, they need to step in. They have a duty to intervene, and they have a duty to report it as well.
To the extent that they, in effect, accept punishment or receive punishment for not reporting?
Yes. They can actually receive punishment for a failure to act and say something. We've taken it a step further, because it's one thing to put it in policy. It's one thing to train it just in an academic setting. One of the most profound ways to train a police officer is what's called scenario-based training. We can sit and we'll look at a PowerPoint, hear someone give a lecture, but until we actually do it, it doesn't become automatic. And when scenario-based training is done correctly, it elicits the same physiological responses you would feel if you were actually in the community doing it. What's important about that is when you're out there and you encounter something like this, you don't think, what did that PowerPoint say? You don't rise to the occasion, you fall back on your training.
It's more intuitive at that point.
Exactly, because if you've done the scenario-based training and it's done correctly, and we have an incredible facility, we got an incredible staff that does it right, your body automatically remembers, hey, I've done this. And in this training, we hear de-escalation and things like that all the time. We don't just teach those as standalone classes. Those are in everything we do, including this duty to intervene. And in some of our scenarios, we have these recruits that are coming through that want to be police officers, maybe in a scenario with that 20-year sergeant who maybe is using excessive force, and they are forced to make a decision. Do I just sit back and let it happen because I'm the new guy and I should respect this sergeant, or do I say something? And then we take it a step further. In some scenarios, maybe they do say something like they should, but if that doesn't work, we require them to use force themselves to stop it. In other words, what we want to see is that brand new officer there in Minneapolis, when he said something, nothing changed, physically remove Derek Chauvin from George Floyd's
That's
neck.
what we all kind of wanted to see.
Absolutely.
Right? And you know as well as I do how difficult that is. In that scenario, I think most of us would have done it. But when it's less abhorrent of something that you observe, it's difficult because it is militaristic. The police force is set up in a militarized kind of a scenario where rank does mean something.
It does.
And when you're a new officer, you're so naive, and half the things that you think, you have to give a second thought anyway, because you're usually wrong.
Exactly.
Right. So I think that's significant. And I wonder too, there's probably no way to measure this, but it would be devastating for the first person to step up and report somebody who is their superior 3 times over, and for it to fail. Yeah. Because it's possible. You know, it may or may not be, a negligence or excessive force, or it might be, and it still comes back to haunt them. And then there are those people that are chastised for the remainder of their career. And that's just a risk that they're going to have to take, which is why I appreciate in your case saying it's an actual policy.
Yes.
So your job is at risk at the very least. If you're not willing to do it for humanity and for the sake of the job and the integrity of the job and the position you hold, then you at least have that going for you.
Absolutely.
Do you think some of the reporting, I mean, it's fascinating you put training in. And this is something that you're in a large department, but even small departments could do that type of training because
Absolutely.
It only takes a room to set it up with experienced officers to do. Do you think some of it is the culture of the new people that are coming in that are also more inclined to look at policing differently than when we came on, maybe?
No question about it. A lot of people complain about this generation. Every generation complains about the next. Maybe complains about the ones prior even. When I look at millennials and the generation that's coming in now, I see a ton of promise. I see all kinds of possibilities. There are challenges, obviously. There are more transient workforce. You better get them in and prove that you care about them, and they're contributing to something that's bigger than themselves. They look more for the intrinsic value rather than the paycheck. They want to go home saying, you know what, I think I made a difference today. They got to know that you care about them, that they're not just a number in there. So you have to work harder to keep them, but what's the problem with that?
Right.
I think they're more aware and willing to speak out about injustices or inequality. They're more accepting of people who don't look like them. I think, well, here's one of the biggest ones for me, and I struggle with this still, work-life balance. All we hear is, oh, I can't get them to work overtime. I can't get them to do this, because they value their time with their family.
Yeah.
They value that work-life balance. You know what? That will lend itself to a more sustained, happy, successful career because they maintain that work-life balance.
For sure.
So there are a ton of advantages with it. But because of that, especially the willingness to see and speak out against injustices and inequality, I think they are more willing to come out and say, you know what, that's wrong. And something else, if I can just shift it slightly, they're more willing to come out and say, you know what, I'm not all right. That is one of the biggest problems we have in law enforcement is we're supposed to take care of everyone else. We're supposed to be the ones that have it under control all the time, despite the trauma we experience directly off duty and on duty, the vicarious trauma we deal with, dealing with other people's trauma.
Right.
We feel like we have to internalize it and just move on, go to the next call. And the saying used to be, suck it up, go on, do your job.
Rub dirt on it, get back out there like you do in the football field.
Don't mind, just do your job.
Right.
That is so wrong. It has been for so long. And I think a lot of it, I don't know all the correlations. I don't have any scientific data, but the mental wellness of the country since COVID has declined drastically. We're social creatures. We're not meant to be isolated. And I think it had a profound impact, not just on people's social lives, their educations, their relationships. We saw more of a decline then. So I think it's critical now more than ever that we step up and do everything we can in law enforcement to do away with the stigma, for me, myself, to step up and say, you know what, there are plenty of times when I'm not all right, and I've got to reach out and get help and set the example so others will step up and do the same.
Yeah, it certainly made us re-examine and reprioritize things, which makes it interesting when you look at the workforce as a whole and how difficult it is to hire and maintain people. And I know you've talked about your process. The police process is arduous, and a lot of police agencies I've seen from personal experience are shortcutting a lot of the onboarding processes in order to get people on.
Right.
Because if it takes you 3 months to get on, they're going to just become disinterested and go take something else. And you're also, with the issue in policing, to make that worse and exacerbate that problem, you have the stigma that's come with policing in the last 5, 6, 10 years, whatever it is. It's progressively gotten less of a desirable profession for people. They're going to come out of school or choose school and pick policing. So how are some ways that you've been able to combat that, or have you been able to combat that in terms of turnover, which I know the investment in their time is significant, but the investment in a police agency's money is huge up front also.
Absolutely.
And you've got guys that want to turn over. I've seen guys that have taken on what normally was a career, and they're using as police work as a stepping stone to something else. How do you combat that? Wow,
there's so many questions in there, and they're all questions all police chiefs across the country are dealing with. First, I want to say in Fort Worth, we're doing really well. When we have the civil service exam, which is the first step in becoming a police officer, we are still averaging around 1,000 applicants every time we post. Where some are doing everything they can just to bring in a few, we're still doing 1,000 plus on pretty much every posting. One of the problems with recruiting, hiring, retention is the way we've always done it. And the thing is, why did we do it? Because that's the way we've always done it. I can't stand that way of thinking. We have to innovate. We have to be different. We have to try new things. We have to be willing to fail. Failure is an option as long as you're failing forward. You're learning from it.
Yep.
If you're too afraid to fail, you never try anything new. And we talk about the kind of officers we want. We want intelligent, professional, brave, compassionate, empathetic people that'll come in and do the job. We're not looking so much to hire law enforcers. We can teach them how to enforce the law. I need problem solvers. I need people who'll come to a call no matter what they face. They don't just automatically think, I'm going to arrest somebody, I'm going to write a ticket and move on to the next call. They think, how can I fix this so this person never has this problem again? We're never return to this. Go to the root issues, try to fix them the best you can. It's hard to do when you're going call to call to call to call because you're understaffed.
Thing. Yeah, that's huge.
But if we do that in the long term, it actually helps. So if those are the kind of people we want, we got to rethink the way we've been recruiting. If you look back when, you and I were starting out, what did you see on recruiting flyers, recruiting posters? You saw guys rappelling out of helicopters with machine guns, right?
Right.
This is cool. It's like Rambo.
Sign up for SWAT.
Exactly. Sign up for SWAT. Like everybody that gets on the department comes to SWAT. And I'll tell you what, when we break in there, we have got, in my opinion, the best SWAT team out there. They won Tactical Team of the Year last year. Top-notch operators.
Oh, yeah.
They are professional. They are compassionate. A lot of people don't understand the de-escalation and things they do every single day to make sure very high stress, very high intensity situations are resolved peacefully. It's incredible.
Especially when they're going more prepared to have to kill someone than any of us.
They have to be, right?
Right.
But rarely are weapons even fired.
That's magnificent.
That's because they plan and they execute like true professionals.
Yeah.
So what do we have to do when we're recruiting? What are we looking for? If that's not what we're looking for, we'll get some people who are great at that because we do need to have those tactical teams. The only overwhelming majority are going to be people who are front-facing, people in the community, people who represent our department. We're looking for those top-notch, sharp people who really want to make a difference. So we've got to look at different ways of recruiting. And I don't know if you saw our latest recruiting video.
I haven't.
It was kind of it was a used car salesman spoof. Hilarious. When the team was putting that together, they wanted to show me clips, and I said, no, let's wait till it's done. I want to see the final product. They brought me in, they showed it to me, and they were all kind of giggling and laughing. I had this look of shock on my face. And I thought, oh my gosh, this has got to be a joke. They're not serious. And when it was over, I just said this earlier, the thought that popped in my head was, we've never done it like this before. And as soon as that thought came in my head, I looked at him, I said, approved, and I got up and walked out.
You sold yourself.
I sold myself because all of a sudden I realized I've got that old school traditional mentality that's going to hold us back. This may fail. We may fall face forward on this one, but let's try it and see because we never have tried it before. And we may actually get something positive. It was overwhelmingly positive. The reviews we got, one of the guys got Officer Big B is who he is on the videos, and his buddy Calzada was doing an interview, and he was on Kelly Clarkson's show. I mean, it went national. What I found, people either absolutely loved it or they absolutely hated it. And I found the majority of the people who hated it were my age and older, but everybody younger than me loved it. And guess who I'm trying to hire?
Exactly.
I'm not trying to hire old farts like me.
That's right.
I'm looking for this newer, younger generation. And one thing we've done in law enforcement, a very traditional field, luckily, we're letting go of some of the negative traditions we've had in the past, right?
For sure. I mean, the further back you go, the
worse it is.
I mean, it's terrible.
It is.
The traditions back then.
We had 150 years. This is our sesquicentennial for the police department. And I can only imagine what it was like in 1873 when we started. But I look at how far we've come, and I can't wait to see how far we go.
Yeah.
But with this video, one of the things that I thought in that moment of clarity, I had that epiphany when I said, we've never done it this way before. I've told people, they all say we got to take these new generations and bring them around to our way of thinking. That's when they'll be good police officers. We got to meet them in the middle. We have to, not saying they're 100% right, but I can tell you, being a Generation Xer, like a Gen Xer, we are not 100% right. But if we meet them in the middle and we work together, we find out our commonalities and how we can work forward to improve one another, and that's when it changes policing forever. That's when we see the real kind of change we want to see, that generations down the road, they can look back at us and say, man, that was really a big move for policing. And I believe 100% where we have been for the last few years and where we're going for the next several years will be considered its own era in policing. There have been several eras of policing. This is going to be one of them. I don't know what it'll be called. I don't know what history will say about us, But I feel my job is to work with the department to make sure our department sets the standard for what that era should be.
So that it'll be called the Noakes era, of course.
Absolutely not.
Come on,
Absolutely not. No. That's the other thing about it. I don't ever want people to think when they see all the great stuff that's going on out there that has anything to do with me. There are so many amazing people on the department, and it's the ones that are actually out there doing the job. The ones in our communities, the ones in our schools, the detectives, the investigators, our specialized units, our professional staff, they're the ones getting it done. I always say the only reason for any success I've ever had in my life has been the grace and blessings of God and the people He's put around me.
Yeah.
And fortunately, I've been surrounded by amazing people my entire life, and it's no different now. The people that I work with, best people you could ever want to work with, they're absolutely incredible.
Well, I appreciate your humility, but
That's
you
true.
sell yourself short too. But
Well,
I think you've
you're
done a
too
lot of
kind.
great things here for sure. My other question kind of tags onto this, and I don't mean to bog down on this too much, but what about there's been a couple of philosophies thrown out, and one is that if you want to get more of a pool of people who are diverse and have an understanding of what's going on, they should loosen some of the standards in onboarding, and that was being one of them. And it's something in my mind that I've always had a trouble getting past, also because it's the way it's always been. But essentially, we're hiring nerds who have never really gotten into anything, right? And then teaching them how to continue to enforce the law. But we're all nerds. We're nerds. And it seems like somebody with a reasonable amount of street smarts who got into something early and recovered from that and now has something in their lives to relate to, who would normally be DQ'd, might be somebody valid to look at. Has that ever been broached as a topic?
Absolutely. When it comes to recruiting and hiring, it's quality over quantity all day, every day, all day long. I would rather hire no one than the wrong one.
Yeah.
Because I would rather just maintain the status quo than bring on people who are going to bring down the reputation of our department and put themselves, other officers and citizens in danger because they can't do the job. You mentioned earlier the investment. The investment is huge when it comes to hiring and onboarding an officer. And there's been in law enforcement a trend when someone maybe wasn't working out. If they're really far along in the process, you're like, man, we've invested a lot of money in this guy, this girl. Let's just see what happens. Absolutely not.
It always turns out
Absolutely.
bad.
You will, if you're worried about money, you're going to end up paying more on the back end.
That's in the private
than as
industry
if you just
too.
ripped the Band-Aid off right then and there.
Yeah.
So we've been much more intentional about that. Even created a committee to look at recruits in the academy or in field training as they're going along. And if it's not just one person making the decision, because maybe that decision's skewed by something.
Mm-hmm.
We want to make sure a group comes together of highly trained, highly qualified people who know what it takes to get the job done out there as a Fort Worth police officer.
Mm-hmm.
To take a hard look and determine, can this person get the job done or not? And I don't care if we've actually had some in the last week of the academy, they'd already passed the TCOL exam, our state licensing exam. They couldn't pass the scenario-based training.
Oh,
They were either maybe using force when they shouldn't or not using force when they should, which put people in danger. I said, let them go. We can't keep someone. It's not fair to them or anyone else.
Right.
We've had people in field training who have been there for months and maybe academically in the academy, they could get it done.
Right.
But when they were out actually doing it in the community in a practical sense, it just wasn't connecting.
You're forcing cops that need an assist to ask for yet another assist.
Exactly.
Right. So it's rendering it worthless, or somebody that, makes a situation worse.
Right.
By being inept. So, in terms of the community relations and things with the new and the old folks, I know that you've done some things to try to bring communities together. There are lots of meetings and lots of different things that people have, whatever they call them, town hall meetings. And, people will get to share with the community some of the things that officers do and the community's concerns and things like that. Are there anything other than a lot of those town hall type scenarios that you find have been effective, either for you personally, which I know you've done some things on a personal level that go a long way, or police wise, or, as policing in general could do to try to make amends with some of the community distrust?
Absolutely. I will say first, those town halls, those listening sessions, we call it, because we go to listen more than talk. I'll answer questions, obviously. A lot of times people just need to be heard. whether we can fix the problem or not. They want to know that they're being heard and their concerns are validated.
Mm-hmm.
So those type of efforts are definitely worthwhile. It's much harder and it takes much longer, but what I find for me personally works better are the personal connections, the relationships. It's all about relationships. And it's about building those relationships prior to needing them. If we're in a time of crisis and there's a certain community member we need to connect with, if we're calling during the crisis and saying, hey, this is Neil, I wonder if we can talk, the response is, Neil who?
Right.
If I've developed that relationship and I call up and say, hey, this is Neil, the response is, hey, what do you need? That's the way it needs to be. And it works both ways because we got to be here for each other.
Yeah.
So taking the time to just show up at an event, doesn't have to be anything formal where I'm scheduled to speak. But I know there's a group of community members maybe coming together or something. Just show up and be there. 80, 90% of us just showing up.
Just participating, being present. We got to meet people where they are literally and physically. We've got to actually be there. And if people, the first time they've seen me some places, maybe that it's a new area. Standoffish, maybe not quite so trusting, but I keep showing up. And after a while, they're like, oh, it's Neil. He's back. And it's not such a big deal. Yeah. Whether
that means going to over to Black Coffee over on Bond, great coffee shop, amazing spot, an area where they need a lot more economic revitalization.
Love it.
It's places like that, Casa Azul over on the north side, just going and hanging out, just being there. And after a while, people will start coming up to you. Hey, I got a question, or hey, I've got a problem, or hey, I had a bad experience. I want to tell you about it. And I need to hear those kind of things. One of the things that's been great is going to churches. And I don't go to church in my uniform. I'm in my church, my Sunday go to meeting clothes, as they say around here. I'm in my church clothes. I've got my family with me. And we go to churches all over Fort Worth, every demographic you can think of. And what's great is it doesn't matter what the culture is. It doesn't matter what the language spoken is. It doesn't matter what side of town it is. We're all there for the same reasons, and we are welcomed with open arms.
Right.
The first time I started doing that, I didn't know how it would go. It's gone really, really well. So for me, it's about taking the time, and it's hard to find sometimes, but you got to make time for what's important,
for
right?
you too, yeah.
You've got to go out there and make those personal connections and actually get to know people and let them get to know you.
So how often are you able to go to these different churches? Because I know I've had some experiences there too, where sometimes there's a unique experience for them as well when you show up.
Yes.
And if it's, if you're the only white guy and they don't know who you are yet, maybe there might be some curiosity, there might be some disdain, but how do you deal with that when you go there, especially when you have your family with you?
I tell you, one of the first ones I went to, it's a church over in Stop 6. I mean, basically in the projects. What for the projects, which happen to be gone now,
right.
Thankfully. We're revitalizing that area. It's gonna be an amazing project. But I even called a friend of mine. I didn't know the pastor that well yet. I'd met him a few times. I was really impressed with this guy. And I called a mutual friend. I said, do you think it's all right if I show up with my family today? And he said, absolutely. He said, I'll call and let him know you're coming, but I'll just give him a shout, a heads up.
Mm-hmm.
About 10 minutes later, this guy called back and he said, pastor said, everybody's welcome in the house of God. Bring your family. Come on. So we go in there and we pull up in our car and we park. We got there kind of early. There's some other folks that are getting out. And we were like the only white people there, right?
Mm-hmm.
And people were getting out of the cars, walking to church, and they looked at us and they had this look like, oh, those poor folks are lost. That's the look I got. And then we get out of our cars with our Bibles in hand, ready to go. And they're like, well, maybe they do know where they are. We walk in the door, and I didn't know, man. I'll be honest. We don't have the best relationships with the Stop 6 community. We're working on it, and we are making improvements, but we got a ways to go.
That's one of those communities, again, that we need reparations. Yeah.
So we walk in there, and I probably didn't take 2 steps, and somebody hugged me. And they're welcoming us, and they're hugging my family, and they take us to a seat, and it's a very small church, so everybody sees everybody, and we stood out. But everybody was thrilled to see us there, smiling, waving, shaking our hands. And then during the opening part of the ceremony, the pastor introduces me. And he introduces me, I wasn't chief yet, as I think it was deputy chief at the time, Deputy Chief Neil Noakes. you could have heard a pin drop. Every head turned, everybody's looking at us, and I'm like, oh, is this about to go? It was going so well. It was going so well.
If I'm not overt enough,
exactly.
Now allow me to stand with my family.
Out a little more. And then he asked me to come up and speak. So I got to spoke briefly. Yes, absolutely. He's a great guy. They were more happy that I was there after they found that out than they were when they first met me.
Of course.
They don't see police officers, especially white police officers, in that church hardly ever. And when it was over, we were probably there for another half hour just talking to people, shaking hands. And I don't say that to brag in any way about, look what I did for the community.
Of course not. No.
You talk about a genuine connection.
Yeah.
For me personally, man, it was powerful.
Yeah.
And here's the best part of that story. So we have this one thing we're doing with our recruits now where we bring in people like this pastor who grew up in Stop 6. He used to be part of the problem. He's actually working now to be a part of the solution in that community. And others who from, say, Diamond Hill, Northside, Pauley, Eastwood, John T. White, areas where we don't have the best relationships.
Minority communities.
Exactly. They're majority minority communities and areas where we're having to work really, really hard to build trust.
Mm-hmm.
And we bring them in to talk to our recruits, and we bring them in to talk about why maybe they didn't trust the police. Maybe talk about a bad interaction they had with an officer, maybe a forward police officer, and then we discuss it.
Mm-hmm.
And it is eye-opening for these recruits, and they can ask any question they want, anything they want. That's the first session. The next session, we do it with similar, if not the same, community members. We do breakout sessions that they rotate through where they have more intimate conversations like this. Ask the hard questions. The last one, we call it the field trip. We take them to these community members. We take them to Stop 6. We take them to Como. We take them to Northside and actually get them in the community. And what we're trying to do is we want them to go into those communities and see them as residents, as citizens, as community members, not as suspects.
Right.
We want them to be able to, whatever barriers there may be, break them down. One of the things that's been great is there's a couple of guys, two really big African-American gentlemen, imposing guys because they're big, right?
Yeah.
And they talk about, you may come up on a scene in my neighborhood and you see two guys that look like us and we're yelling at each other. And we're going, and they'll kind of play it out. We're moving our hands around. We're loud. We're in each other's faces. And you think there's all kinds of aggression. You think there's about to be a fight. And we're just talking about the Cowboys. He said, that's the way our culture interacts sometimes. And we don't need you rolling up in your car, jumping out and trying to tackle one of us because you think we're about to fight. We're not. It's just the way it is.
Right.
I want them to have those realizations at the academy.
Perspective.
In a controlled, safe environment.
Yeah.
Rather than in a high intensity situation in the community where it could go bad. Right. But to go back to my original story, that pastor told that story about me going to his church. And he talked about the next time I was going to go was for their 8-year anniversary. It just so happened it was the day after Tatiana Jefferson was killed.
Oh, wow.
And I thought, man, I don't know about this one. I don't know. So I called him up. I said, first, I don't want to be disrespectful. Second of all, am I okay showing up with my family? And he said, brother, you are always welcome in the house of the Lord, and you're my brother. Don't worry about it. I showed up, and I'm not going to lie, my man. I was a little nervous.
Yeah.
I was afraid to be yelled at, cursed at, things would happen. They welcomed us with open arms, hugged us the same exact way they did that first time. So he told that story in the first session where those recruits met with the community members with no one saying anything, no direction, not even a suggestion. About a dozen of those recruits showed up at his church the next Sunday.
No way.
They just showed up, man. And a couple of them have become members. Both, one's Hispanic, I think one's a white male. They love the diversity of it. Mm-hmm. They love the fact they're getting into the community. And quite frankly, just the congregation of that pastor are some of the most authentic, genuine people, loving people you'd ever meet in your life. So I know the things we're doing are working because I never expected those recruits would just show up on their own.
Yeah.
And they didn't even tell anybody. It was the pastor who told us about it. So they weren't doing it trying to get extra credit.
Reasons. Yeah.
They were doing it for authentic reasons, man.
Yeah.
And that's where change happens.
For sure. I totally agree with that. That's and that's something too, that when you go into police work and you're going to be working in a community that is a poor community, which is typically crime-ridden also.
Unfortunately.
Because of its socioeconomic status,
mm-hmm.
then you have cops that just run around and start associating the high crime with the community.
Yes.
When the whole time, the purpose of you fighting crime in that community is for the sake of the community.
Absolutely.
Who is by whole good people.
I'd love to tell you about it. You just made me think of something else. Another program that we started at Fort PD. It's based off a model that LAPD started back in 2000. A friend of mine named Johnny Nahn, he's a professor at TCU and the director of graduate studies. I actually got a promotion. I don't remember what his title is now. Great guy. He found out from a student who used to play basketball at TCU, then moved back to LA, became an LAPD police officer, then took an online master's course. He told Johnny about what's called Operation Progress. Short version. So you have the Watts community in LA, that's South Central LA.
Yep.
One of the hardest areas in the country. They were dealing with all the people causing the problems every single day, and it began to be where they've just figured everybody in here is like the people we're arresting. And they started noticing these families that every once in a while would come out. And you have these families, many of them immigrant families, some of them families that they just can't get anywhere else. They're trying their best. Man, they're working their tails off.
You can't just move when you're in a poor community. You're stuck.
And one thing he said the ones they saw really trying, they weren't underemployed. They were overemployed and undercompensated.
Right.
So they're working 80 hours a week at minimum wage, barely putting food on the table. Kids couldn't go outside because there's gang members right outside, armed, selling drugs, doing whatever they do. They started realizing, you know what, there are really good people here. What can we do to help? So it started as a really small grassroots effort that's grown into something major. So they take these kids, many of them are in LA Unified School District, where the suicide rate, the high school dropout rate, and the pregnancy rate are higher than the graduation rate. Like hardly anybody graduates, but kids routinely fail. And it's not a knock against LA Unified. I don't know much about it, but in this segment of their service area, things were atrocious.
It's a generational issue at that point.
Is.
Yeah.
So what they did was they partnered with a local private school in the area. They got with the families. They took the kids out of the public schools, put them in these private schools, paid tuition, paid for their uniforms, paid for their supplies, paid for tutoring, paid for case management, anything and everything they need. Parents have to take what's called life journey classes because many folks grow up in amazing families. And they just assume everybody else gets the same opportunities.
Yeah.
They assume everybody else's parents were trained to be good parents. That's not always the case. You have to have at least one supportive adult in the home to support that child because it doesn't matter what we do in schools or anywhere else. If they're not getting it at home, it's not going to work.
Yep.
Literacy levels, strong role models, those are huge predictors in a child's success.
They're going to latch on to the easiest common denominator, which is usually not in the home.
Something bad.
Yeah.
The strongest predictor research has shown to a success for a child is strong family ties. So we want to make sure that there's something there. And they're not looking for the kids who are the worst of the worst or the best of the best. Best of the best probably have what they need. Worst of the worst are kind of beyond the reach of this group. What they're looking for are the kids in the middle who get left behind, the ones that nobody's paying attention to. Maybe a C student. It could be an A student, maybe, but they're just not getting the support they need.
They don't have opportunities.
They don't have hope. Yeah. So they take these kids, they start in third or fourth grade. We're talking all the way through high school, through graduation, through college, into career, whatever they do. And every kid is partnered with an LAPD officer as a mentor throughout this program. It's not just show up one day and give away backpacks at a school, which is great as well. It's not a one and done. You're invested long term. Well, we're doing that in Fort Worth now.
Awesome.
Starting out our pilot program, which is a few years old now, is in Como. And we have kids in River Tree Academy and Miss Indy's Christian Academy. Yep. The ones who have aged out of those, we have one at the Fine Arts Academy. We've got one in the Idea Public Schools or the charter school. These kids are doing amazing things, and every one of them is partnered with a Fort Worth police officer as a mentor. And what you said that made me think of that is I was sold when we went and looked at this program in about 5 minutes. It was absolutely amazing. The executive director at the time said, Operation Progress is the highest form of community policing out there. They had a hard time getting some of the families to buy in. They were all in until they found out about the police component. Like, I don't want my kids having anything to do with LAPD.
Right.
Once they were able to...
Their reputation is a lot more difficult than a lot of agencies.
They've got an uphill battle. And then, like I mentioned before, some were immigrant communities whose citizenship status maybe wasn't what they wanted. Oh, I'm going to get deported if I join. And they guess, listen, we're just here to help you. Work all that out however you want to. We're just here to help you and your kids. We want to help your family. So once they got people involved, they absolutely loved it. And they said what was happening over time is it was changing the hearts and the minds of those students, which was changing the hearts and minds of the family, which eventually can change the hearts and minds of the community about police officers.
And changing the police officers.
Bam. That's when I heard that, I was sold. But then the next thing they said was, just like we talked about, if an officer goes in the same neighborhood every day for work and only deal with the worst of the worst in that community, they may become jaded and start to think everybody in that community is the same way when 99% are not. Right. They're good people like anybody else who want the same things everybody else wants. Mm-hmm. So it's changing the hearts and minds of the officers about the communities they served. That's huge, man.
Is that an organization that somebody can contribute to outside of law enforcement as well?
Yes, it's a 501c3. Huh. We have some of the greatest philanthropic organizations that contribute, like the Amy G. Carter Foundation, Sid Richardson, Miles Foundation, Rainwater, Hillwood. We have so many people putting in. But the thing is, what we're finding to really sustain it, we also need just small donations.
Right.
People who want to contribute. You don't have to give us $100,000, right? Yeah. If you can give us $100, $10, every single bit helps.
Yeah, that sounds like a jam right up my alley. That's quite absolutely up my alley. So that's fantastic. I appreciate you sharing that too.
You bet.
So what makes what is the making of a Chief Noakes? I mean, you've come a long way since I first met you, and what are maybe some of let me just start with, what is maybe one of the most impactful experiences or lessons you learned as a kid, and did it have anything to do with you making the decision to become a police officer at some point?
Yeah, I'll be honest. Were you? I can't think of any one like major incident that led me here. It's been a series of many, many small incidents and interactions. As I said before, it's all the grace and blessings of God and the people He's put around me. And since I was born, I've been surrounded by amazing people. I was given some amazing opportunities. We never had much growing up, don't get me wrong. But I saw an interview with Lou Holtz, the Notre Dame storied head coach.
Yeah.
And asked him about his upbringing. He said, I was born with a silver spoon in my mouth. I thought, I didn't know he came from wealth. He said, we lived in a one-room shack with no electricity, no running water. There were 15 of us in the house.
And a spoon.
But I was never unwanted. I was never unloved. I was always supported. I was born with a silver spoon in my mouth. We had running water and electricity. Don't get me wrong, but it wasn't that we had a lot of things monetarily when it came to just things. But I was always loved. I was always wanted, always supported. That's been critical. My dad was a firefighter. Later on in life, he surrendered into the ministry, became a pastor. I've never known my dad to have less than 2 jobs. There's usually 3 or more, always working, maybe the hardest working man I've ever met in my life. My mother was a stay-at-home mom with me, and I have an older sister and a younger sister until we all went off to school. Then she's like, I want to contribute financially too. So she wanted to be able to put us on the and be home when we got off the bus. So there's not a lot of jobs that do that. Well, she found out about cleaning houses. Oh. I could go clean a couple of houses in between school drop off and pick up, and I can help out a little bit.
Yeah.
And I never thought about it, but my mom was scrubbing other people's toilets to try to provide a better life for us.
Yeah.
So for my parents, it's always been about service, selflessness, humility, faith, family, and friends, right? That's been one of the biggest motivating factors for me, and it extends to my grandparents. It's really been a great life.
Yeah.
And then in my career, there's been different things throughout the years. A couple of things, and you'll understand this. Sometimes I've just had really good leaders. You don't need rank to be a leader, and having rank does not make you a leader.
That's a real luck of the draw too.
It is.
Comes outside.
But both ends of that spectrum work.
Yeah,
Maybe you have somebody, because you have some people who are great leaders who aren't even in a leadership position. They have no rank.
Right.
They're informal leaders. They're the kind of people when in roll call, when they talk, everybody stops and listens. And then sometimes you'll have a formal leader, someone of a certain rank, and as soon as they start talking, everyone tunes out.
Right.
But I've had people in leadership roles who were actually leaders that inspired me. But unfortunately, I had some that were in leadership roles who were not leaders. And I thought we have to have better. And I don't want to be that person.
Right.
If I ever get the opportunity, I'm going to try to do better. And trust me, I fail daily, but I really try to improve daily as well. Seeing those leaders, seeing where there's so much work to do, knowing that I don't have all the answers, but I'm willing to collaborate and work with people. The most successful people in the world aren't the smartest people at everything they need to do.
Of course.
They surround themselves with the people who are. They give them the tools, the resources, and the support they need, and they get out of their way. They let them do the jobs. Here's the rails. We got to stay in here. This is what the end goal needs to be. Figure out how we get there.
Yeah.
I read a book recently called Who, Not How. And it said in any organization, when a person gets up to a certain level, you have to stop asking how. Whenever a project comes up, there's something that has to be done. I've always been the get down in the weeds and get it done guy. How am I going to do this? How do I do it? I can't. There are some things that I need to be the one doing. So I take those and I run with those. Everything else, I have to not ask how, I ask who.
Yeah.
Who is the best person to take this? I give them that direction. I give them that support. I give them what in the military they call the commander's intent. This is what I intend to achieve. I'll leave it to you to find out how we get there.
And that's empowerment. That's not,
I'm telling you, man.
That's not pawning it off.
No.
That's empowerment.
First year and a half I was chief, I was completely overwhelmed because I was trying to do everything. Not because I didn't trust my team, not because I'm a control freak. I thought that was my job, and I thought I was dumping on them.
Yeah,
right?
Right.
But it is empowering. It's succession planning. When people know that you trust them to get a job done, that makes them feel good. It gives them confidence in themselves.
Sure.
And you know what? Initially it may take longer because there may be a lot of questions. I welcome questions. I don't want people to guess. If you don't know, come ask me.
Mm-hmm.
But then once they get those questions answered, once I give them all the resources they need up to the point that I can, I expect them to go out there and perform like champs, and they do. And sometimes it's hard because in your mind, you've reverted back already to that howl mentality, and you figured out how you think it should be done. And their route is nothing like what you said.
That's the toughest time.
It is. But if it's legal, moral, ethical, and it gets the job done, you got to let them do it. And what I've found so many times is their way was better anyway. And if I had tried to get in the middle of it, I would have screwed the whole thing up.
Yeah.
Letting them do what they need to do, be innovative, be problem solvers, they do it better than I would have to begin with.
Fantastic. That's fascinating. And in business, I run into the same thing. You know, could part of the problem be that I just want it done a certain way? And absolutely, is
the answer
part
to
of
that
the
is
problem.
always yes.
Yes,
Yeah.
it is. I'm trying to get over myself, but I also would like
Same
you
here.
to do something else. You know? Can we meet in the middle somewhere?
Yeah.
I totally get it.
It's hard to learn.
And so your dad was a firefighter, and you still managed to become a cop after seeing
Yes.
what a perfectly cushy gig that was. So there is a little bit of stubborn in you. So, and you were once a musician. I heard.
I think that's way too generous. Way too
but
generous.
as a quote unquote kid, we're talking in your 20s, though, right?
Yeah. Late teens, early 20s. Yeah.
Yeah, and you're out playing and everything.
I don't know if I call it playing. I had an instrument in my hand and I was doing something with it, but I was not talented. I was not that guy. But yeah, I had just some friends got together. We kind of played instruments. They had started a band. They needed a bass player. I'd never played a bass, but like, hey, give me one. We'll figure it out.
Did
we'll
you
make
play
it
a
happen.
little guitar? But
I played guitar prior to that. Again, I'm not an expert on the guitar. I'm not you. I'm no Tegan Broadwater.
I'm no expert either, man.
But it was fun, man. It was fun. Just getting up there on stage and playing. The one thing, my mother, God blessed her with an amazing singing voice.
Oh, really?
My sisters, oh my gosh, incredible. I cannot sing to save my life.
Really?
It is terrible. But I can play just enough to make a fool of myself, pretty much on some instruments. And that was a really cool time, man. Just getting to go out with some guys, get on stage, and perform music that we had written. As terrible as it was, man, it was ours.
Because that era was a lot of original music. You were playing out in Deep Ellum and all that stuff.
Yeah, so this was a hub. Texas was a hub for original music back, early mid 90s.
Yeah.
Great time to do it. There were some other great bands that we played with. Just played some local shows, in Fort Worth, Dallas, Wichita Falls, but nothing. We're never a traveling, touring band, nothing like that.
Oh,
no.
That's fine. But, it is, I think there is something significant about being able to be creative and create your own tunes too. Because most bands in so many other states and cities are forced to play 3 sets of covers and then throw one of their originals in towards the end of the night when people don't care as much and aren't listening and whatever, and that's all they get.
Well, it's hard to say no, because at least then it seemed if you played covers really well, they let you throw in a couple, but you got paid a lot more because people wanted to hear music they knew.
Yeah.
If you're coming in with completely original music that nobody's heard, you don't have many people show up. Yeah.
Yeah. But then you have to be a marketer, right? Yes. And you have to have a leader in your group and all that kind of stuff. Did you find anything from that era applied to your skill set that you took into police work, or was it just a complete diversion?
There's a lot of difference. What I will say though, I think in almost any career field, people skills. It's all about people skills. Mm-hmm. You're trying to set up a gig. You're trying to work with other creative type A individuals to write a song. You're trying to schedule practices. You're trying to schedule when you might get to play. You're trying to get people to come watch you when you're an absolute nobody. Yeah. You've got to have really strong people skills. You got to know how to talk to folks. You need to be convincing, authentically so. I'm not saying you tell them whatever they want to hear to get them to do what you want. It's got to be genuine, honest, and authentic. I think pretty much every job I've had has kind of helped me hone those, and I've got a lot of honing left to do. But I'd say that's probably the major takeaway, just working with people, especially in stressful situations.
Yeah. And our generation too went through a transformation of time where we didn't have email even at that time. So our mailing lists are actual mailing lists.
Yes.
You're like writing up a flyer. Yes. The bass player's drawing a cool picture and you're all like signing something, and you copy it off and lick stamps and send it, or create a postcard, and you're literally mailing out things every month.
Isn't that crazy now?
However many people.
It seems so ridiculous now.
But it seemed easier to be authentic, because when they were signing up for your mailing list, they're literally meeting you. In order to even get on that list, you have to address a person first.
It was much more personal.
Yeah. So that's fascinating that you do that. And now you've got, potentially you've got a musician in the family, or are you going to try to convert him?
So I'm very happily married. We've got 4 kids, and our youngest, music is his thing. He's tried a few different sports. He tried football, tried baseball, tried soccer, golf, and he enjoyed it, but he wasn't passionate about it. Mm-hmm. Then he picked up a guitar, and we have a piano in the house. My wife plays piano as well.
All right. And
he just started to plink around on the piano. Next thing we know, he's playing songs. He's playing the guitar, and he excelled. He's playing the trumpet now. Everything that has to do with music he wants. He wants to go to Guitar Center every day, and every day we're there. He sees something. He goes, "Dad, I think I want a ukulele. Dad, I think I need this." I don't remember what it's called. It's like a keyboard that you blow into to play.
Yeah, sure.
He's got one of those. He has some kind of percussion instrument. He wants a drum kit now. He's got another friend who is just as sold on music, and they become really close for this love of music that they share.
That's awesome.
And it's been really cool for me to be able to actually sit down with my son and work on some songs together. I'll come home, he goes, "Hey Dad, look what I learned today. Play a song for me." So I'll pick up a guitar and maybe we play it together.
That's awesome.
It is. It's completely awesome.
That's really a cool way to commune with your kids too.
Oh,
and there's no pressure, and especially multi-instrumentalists are a lot more common these days than they were back in the day too.
I think it's wonderful too, because it's kind of like with sports. They used to tell kids, "Okay, 5 years old, you got to specialize. Pick a sport."
Yeah.
You can't. Well, they're saying now that's the dumbest thing you could do. Let them play anything and every sport they want, because there are things you learn in one sport that will cross over and translate into whatever your main sport may be. I believe it's the same with music. If you just love music, play whatever instruments you want to play. If there's one that you are passionate about and that one only, then great, go for it. Otherwise, try everything that's out there. And it is great with my son, because one thing I've tried to be very conscious about is not try to live vicariously through him or try to impose whatever, maybe, I wish I'd done this.
Yep.
I let him try things. I don't let him quit. He has to finish whatever he starts.
Sure.
But if the next season comes along and he doesn't want to do it, I don't make him do it.
Right.
This has been one where I don't say a word about it. He wants to do it. So when you share a passion like that with one of your kids, it's pretty special.
That's fascinating. I love it. I love that he's into that stuff. And you were saying too, he's playing 90s music.
Oh, yeah.
Too.
Yeah, there have been times I'd come in the house from work and I hear a song, it's like, man, who's listening to old music? And I go in there and he's actually playing it. Like, where did you learn that, man? And, for us back in the day, you'd go somewhere and buy a guitar magazine or something, or try to get some tabs or some music somewhere.
Right. It'd take forever to get a hold of stuff.
Exactly.
One at a time. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. And you buy one magazine and that's all you're going to have for a month until the next one comes out.
Yeah.
Any song you want to learn is online. Pull it up like that, no problem.
Yeah.
So that is convenient. It's nice to see that. We didn't have that.
No, I wish we had that. I'd play a lot better even now.
Oh, I know I would. I hope.
I think for the most part, what I'd like to touch on is the fact that I know how busy you are. You know how busy you are. No one else really has a true appreciation about the job that you have and the intense amount of time. You can only do it for so long, although some people really learn how to manage their time. I'd love to know some of the things you do to manage your time in the position you're in. And if you have any aspirations beyond police work or after police work, so to say, maybe any thoughts about what you might do, because you seems like have the built-in components for being an entrepreneur, which people tend to throw that term around loosely. Like everyone thinks they are. But I think with the amount of work ethic and the people skills and the time management and determination to make it from A to B, and there isn't an option, those are all things that you possess. I think it lends itself to a great entrepreneurship. I don't know if you've ever thought of that. So
yeah, appreciate that. As far as retirement, anything's open. All I know how to do really is be a cop. That's what I've done for the last 23 years.
That's what you think.
Well, but everybody tells me there's a lot of things, like you just said, that will translate really well into other areas. As far as the first part of your question, I remember when I was first selected, man, I was so excited that I got selected as chief. There were some really strong candidates. I didn't know if I had a chance. And I talked to my predecessor, Ed Krause, who was a phenomenal chief just before me, and another guy who came up all the way through the ranks to become chief. I said, Ed, you were the executive assistant chief, so the number 2 in command. You had been acting chief while the chief was out. You've done the job. I said, I'm actually I went from deputy chief over the assistant chief rank to chief. So I missed out on the experience I would have had at that rank. Mm-hmm. I said, how much of a shift was it for you? You couldn't have been that much because you were right there. He said, it was night and day. He said, there is no comparison. And I didn't believe him. I said, no, come on. You're just trying to prepare me. He said, no. He said, until you sit in that chair, you have absolutely no idea what it's like. The pressure is constant. It's crushing and it never stops.
Yeah.
I thought, okay, whatever. He's just trying to scare me. Man, he was right. I had an idea of what I thought it might be like. I was wrong. I knew some of the requirements, some of the stresses, but until you really experience them and you've got that weight on your shoulders 24/7, 365, you don't really appreciate how difficult the job can be. And please, this isn't a woe is me, feel sorry for me talk.
I am
blessed to be here.
Make you say this because we know that that's it. And you're constantly in a position where you know that the decision you make, knowing it's as right as you can make it, is going to be faced with dissension every single time.
Every time. Every decision I make is going to make someone unhappy.
Yep.
As much as I'm trying to, make everybody happy, my primary goal is to do what's right because it's right. Make the right decision for the right reasons, and then just put up with the consequences. And I got to know that no matter what may go right in the department, man, it's not me. It's the people that are out there doing the job. I got to know whatever goes wrong in the department, it doesn't matter whose fault it may be. It's my responsibility.
Yep.
Everything that happens.
Yep.
And I'll be honest, it is trying at times. When I got hired on February 2nd, 2021, there have been several articles out about major city chiefs, larger cities, like Fort Worth. The average tenure of a major city chief was 3 to 5 years. It was only a matter of months after I got hired, there was a new article came out in a national publication. They said the average tenure for major city chief now, 1 to 3 years.
Oh, wow.
I just saw an article yesterday, the commissioner for NYPD, 18 months. She's done. She's out. We see it all over the country where chiefs are doing less and less time. And a lot of it is because of the increased pressures going through the defund the police movement, dealing with COVID and all the restrictions that were going on. There's so much of a cry for change And you know what? Some things need to change, but very little acknowledgement of the things that have changed.
Of course.
It's frustrating for a chief, especially when you see the good work, and I can't see all of it. I mean, total, I got like 2,300 employees. Unfortunately, I can't see what every single one of them does, but I know they're doing great work. I hear about it all the time. I see body camera footage of it, but it's just that one negative thing that happens,
of course,
that wipe out all of those as if they never even happened. And it's very frustrating. So he was right. It's something you really do not understand until you actually do the job. The time commitment I knew was going to be immense. I didn't understand what it was really going to be like until I did it.
Yeah.
There's a saying called the tyranny of the urgent, and everything seems urgent.
Right.
People come to you, and it may not be the biggest thing going on in the world, but it's the biggest thing going on in their world.
Yep.
And they want to talk to the chief. They want it fixed right now. It's got to get done. And that's where I've had to learn to rely on my chief of staff, my executive assistant chief, my deputy chiefs, my commanders, everybody. I have to delegate some of these things out. I said, would you call this gentleman? There's an issue, but I've got 15 other calls over here I'm making. This one's urgent, needs to get done. But when it comes to the tyranny of the urgent, some things are urgent, but not important. Some things are important and urgent. And there's a flow in there.
The hierarchy of importance.
Exactly. So what I've had to do is make sure the first things I deal with are the things that are urgent and important and really need to be done right now. Because to everybody, something is the most important thing going on then. But I can't just deal with everything at once.
You're one person. So that was, that was one of my other questions. Because I know even from the community, a lot of those people will come forward and feel like, all I'm talking to is a lieutenant, and this is ridiculous.
Right.
This is so important. The chief needs to know about it. And it's not that you don't know, and it's not that you're not paying it proper attention. You're one person, and nobody else realizes, something else drops at the sacrifice of your time to pay attention to this, and other things fall down. So
a mistake I made early on was I was trying to fulfill all of those.
Yeah.
But you're right. As I picked up one over here, this one dropped, and I forgot about it because I had so many things on my plate. So now we have a citizen who thinks I don't care at all. The Fort Worth Police Department doesn't care at all. I'm mad, and I will never trust the police again.
Yeah.
I found if somebody reaches out, especially someone of maybe some of a certain rank, they appreciate it. I found it's more important for me to make sure someone in the department who has a compassionate ear, who will listen to and try to solve these problems calling out, even if it's not me, is more important than them hearing directly from me. And usually, if I can get it down somewhere closer to the level where that problem is happening, they're going to give them better information anyway, and a more immediate response.
Be able to fix it. Yeah,
absolutely. So I've had to work on prioritization. That book, Who Not How, that I mentioned earlier, completely changed my perspective on what delegation really is. It's not delegation dump. It's not shirking responsibility. It's getting things done, and it's empowering others to be the best they can be.
Yeah.
To one day step into the role I'm in and do it much better than I ever even imagined. Then I found out, and really this is one that I knew in a academic sense maybe, but I didn't put it into practice. If I don't control my calendar, my calendar will control me. No question about it. And I have to be careful about what I put where and when. Sometimes I've got to cancel things and move them to go over here. My assistant, Nicole, does a great job with putting all that together. I couldn't handle my calendar. I mean, that's a full-time job in and of itself, is just getting that calendar straight. But prioritizing, dealing with what's in front of me right now that really needs to be done right now, and then just knocking them off the list as I go helps. I used to do a to-do list. And maybe my priorities were up here, and then these are things I'd like to get to. I don't even bother anymore because I go in with a plan for the day, and then the day reveals its plan to me, which is nothing like I thought it was supposed to be.
Of course.
Oh, it just takes over. But you got to be flexible. You got to be agile, got to shift, deal with whatever's in front of you, adapt and overcome. You adapt or die, right? So I have to do that every single day. I find that I have to make sure I am intentional about planning time for my family. I talked with the chief over in Dallas, Eddie Garcia, great guy. I've been doing this chief thing for a lot longer. I talked to him about it one time. Said, you got to schedule breaks. One other thing I found, I was going from meeting to meeting to meeting to meeting, taking notes in each meeting. By the time I got to the last meeting, I forgot everything that happened in the first one.
Right.
So take time, take 15 minutes between meetings, Put your notes down somewhere, assign what you need to. So when you go on to the next meeting, that's handled. He said, schedule a break at some point in your day. If you go all day long, 8, 10, 12, 16 hours, and you never take a break, you can do that short term. But he said, if you're wanting to be in this for the long game, you got to pace yourself.
Yeah. You'll drop balls and you'll go nuts.
Your health is going to suffer.
Yeah.
You got to take care of yourself if you want to take care of others. It's like when I use this analogy a lot, when you get on an airplane and the flight attendant goes through the pre-flight checklist. One of the things they say, in the event of an emergency, oxygen mask may fall from the roof of the cabin. And what do they tell you to do first?
Put it on yourself
Put
first.
yours on, because if you can't breathe, you can't help anybody else breathe. If you're not good, you can't make sure nobody else is good. Yes, then you both suffer.
Yeah.
So I tried, and I don't like to focus on myself. I like to focus on everything else. But I found if I'm not intentional about making sure I get some decent sleep, I stay active, exercise, try to eat right, and try to have that time with my family, that helps. If I didn't do that, I may have been one of those 1 to 3 year guys that right in the middle at 2, I said, I'm out.
Yeah. Or just be a poor leader in general.
Exactly.
But yeah, your longevity is dependent upon that. Are you actually making when you say you prioritize the urgent and important and all those things, are you making those delineations, or do you have somebody that helps you also to do that?
I do some of it myself, but I have people that help me with it, like my executive assistant, Chief Rob Aldridge, kind of my right-hand man. A lot of times I'll sit down and say, hey, look, here's what I've got. Here's what I'm looking at. What are your thoughts? And what I don't do, I learned some people in leadership roles do this. They say, here's what I'm thinking, tell their plan. They go, what do you think? Well, really what you've done, whether you realize it or not, you kind of implied, this is the route we're going. I want you to agree with me. So before I ever say anything about what I think needs to be done with all of these issues that need to be dealt with, I'll try to be very intentional about saying, what do you think? And getting their thoughts first.
Keeping your mouth shut.
Exactly. Stop and listen first, see what they've got to say. And again, I usually find that they've got better ideas than I do anyway. And that's what we go with.
That's awesome. Well, I'm appreciative. And I know you said all that because you want me to feel guilty that you're taking all this time here. I feel super guilty, but I also am honored, brother. I really, really appreciate you taking time to stop down. And I hope it enlightens people, and just in general. I don't think there's enough appreciation for the position that you're in, not just the pressure and the things that onus of responsibility that you have to take, but also just understanding that you're so human and compassionate and such a good dude underneath all of that. I think it's really important for people to understand that we are all human and we're all trying to somehow make this work, and everybody's coming from somewhere else. And I think you've done magnificent things. So I, for one, I really appreciate you, man.
Well, you're very kind, man. I appreciate it. If anybody wants to show appreciation to me in any way, do it by showing appreciation to the officers out there. Do it by showing appreciation to our professional civilian staff, our volunteers, the ones that are actually out there doing the job that needs to be done. That will be more, I'll have more gratitude for that than anything they could say or do for me. Yeah. Show them how much you appreciate it. I mean, I appreciate you, brother. I appreciate the fact that you're willing to try new things. You're willing to tackle tough issues. You're just such an eclectic guy, man. You got your hand in a little bit of everything and you excel at all of it. I'm proud of you, man. I consider you a brother for many reasons. This was an honor to sit down and do this with you today. I'm proud you're my friend.
Thank you, man. That means a lot too. Thanks, brother.
What's it take? What you gonna do? What you gonna do? Success around the sandbox with second grade rules. A confident fake to make you do what they want when they won't pay the fool. A diplomatic face is the one to see you through. Don't let those bigots take you off your game, but just to let them loose. Just sit here in the front